And welcome back to another edition of the Indusoft Web Studio video training series covering WebThinClient. In today's video, we're going to cover what is one of three different thin clients that Indusoft offers in Indusoft Web Studio. The WebThinClient is kind of works with Internet Explorer, and we'll talk about the reasons why and how that works, and that's the topic of this video. We have another thin client called Secure Viewer, and we'll cover that in a different video, as well as Mobile Access, which now has two subparts to it. The tabular version, which is text-based and can run on any browser, and then the new, what we're calling the Enhanced SMA, or Mobile Access, that now works on HTML5 and can work on iPads, iPhones, iPod Touches, Android phones and tablets, Linux, anything that'll support HTML5. So we cover all the bases with all the different mobile types of devices. We're going to talk about the topology and how this lays out and what thin clients look like, especially the web thin client in this video. We'll publish the screens as HTML. There's really kind of three steps to this. Publishing the screens as HTML. We'll configure the WebThinClient settings within the Indusoft Web Studio development environment. And then we'll configure a web server. In this case, we're going to do Microsoft IIS. Talking about the topology and how this lays out, we've developed this training application. We've built on navigation and kind of a foundation of screens. And we're going to run that. Now, it's really important that you have this running, because when you have the project running, that's where and when the database or the tags database comes alive. So you have the tags and the runtime running in a PC, and then prior to starting the runtime, we're going to go an extra step, which is saving the screens as HTML. And when we save those screens as HTML, that's going to save those in the web subfolder of the project. Now I have the project folder here. This is our project folder. This is where we have the root of our project, and we've gone over this a few times. This web subfolder is where those HTML files will live. And so what you can see here now is I don't have any HTML files in here, and I'll come back to this in a little bit. So once we have this, and we have this all running on our runtime PC, if you will, then we can have a web server that will point to the folder where these HTML screens are at. And when it gets a request from a browser, from an outside browser or a browser built into the same PC, it will then serve up those HTML pages, for example, like this. If Internet Explorer here requests to this PC, this web server will know to listen on port 80 and reply to the request from this browser. And what happens is, this tags database doesn't live yet. What happens is, the first time you go to run this, this installs an ActiveX component into Internet Explorer. Now this is really why this needs to be Internet Explorer. This file that's created by, or this ActiveX that's created by Indusoft, is called issymbol.ocx. And because ActiveX runs in Internet Explorer and can't necessarily run in Chrome or Firefox. Now, of course, there may be ways to get it to run, but Indusoft supports Internet Explorer because that's what it was designed to do. Anyway, so the first time that this goes through, issymbol automatically tries to install from the Indusoft website. Now, we'll talk a little bit about, when we get into the configurations, about alternative ways to install issymbol.ocx. And as I understand it, in PCs or Windows desktop or server-based environments, ActiveXs can install on their own as long as the security settings are correct. But on Windows CE and possibly embedded, you may have to manually install that. The Internet Explorer versions on those will not allow it an automated install. So what happens is, the HTML gets the graphics across port 80. This issymbol installs in this PC, and then what happens is, this now knows, or this essentially acts as the viewer for this particular PC. Well, that now knows to go get the data to populate the various fields here on the screen, or to get the tags. And that happens to the tags database across what we call the data server. And that happens across port 1234. Now, very often in industrial environments or most office environments, you're going to find that port 80 is probably open because that's a standard HTML or HTTP, I forget which, but it's a standard for browsers to be able to request web pages. But port 1234 is maybe not going to be necessarily open or available, and you may have to talk to your IT department to get that configured. An alternative does exist. We can configure something called Web Tunneling Gateway, which we'll see in the menus shortly. That this data server, this tags, instead of going across port 1234, can be routed through the web server. In this case, it would have to be Microsoft IIS to go through this port 80. So instead of having this connection, it would go through the web server and across port 80, so that you might not necessarily need to get the IT department involved, or at least have them make changes that they don't want to make. So this is the basic topology of this, is that we already have our project created. We're going to save those screens as HTML. We're going to set up a web server and then point our browser back to this PC. In this case, it's going to be the browser on my same PC, but it could be remote, could be anywhere, could be across the world. And then once that connection is made, it's going to install or use IS symbol and share the tags. Now there's a concept that we need to talk about scope of tags, and you may have noticed this when we created tags in the tag database or the datasheet view, is that some tags have the scope of local versus server. And really what that means, if it's the server scope, it means the tags themselves are synchronized between these two different locations, or locations that could live on other browsers on other PCs. If the tag is set up as local, each tag database has its own copy of the tags database for that particular tag, that's done on a tag by tag basis. And so if you want values to exist in the server but possibly different values on the thin clients, then you would set that particular tag up as having a local scope. So essentially, server scope means that it's going to be synchronized. So if it changes on one of these thin clients, it's going to be synchronized back to the server, and then the server will then push it back out to any other thin clients. Now here I'm showing multiple instances of this that could be on different PCs, other locations across the plant, and we can have up to 128 thin clients. Another thing to note is that on Windows CE, if CE is the server, we support up to 8 thin clients. So again, with the server versus local scope, let's say a tag changed here and it was set up as server scope. It would go back to the tags database on the runtime, and then that would push it out to all the other thin clients. If it was local scope, the tag would change here and it would not synchronize across all the other thin clients or even back to the server. They would each have their own copy of the values for that. So let's moving along here. Let's see. We've talked about the server. Oh, this web server, it can be just about any web server. In fact, there's one built in for testing into InduSoft Web Studio, which we'll quickly talk about and cover. But you should not use that during a production environment, especially not connected to the real world internet, because of security issues and performance issues. You should probably use something like Microsoft IIS, which in some cases, as I mentioned, the Web Tunneling Gateway or some other features within InduSoft Web Studio really needs Microsoft IIS. But for the basic functionality, you can use other web servers such as Apache and other web servers for that matter. But use something with security built in and known and trusted and well established. So taking a look at these different possibilities with these different thin clients, you could use this. Somebody in the maintenance and production staff could use something like this. Quality, a plant manager. This could even be remote. If you have a facility, let's say like a wastewater treatment plant, you could get these updates on your home PC and maybe make the decision whether or not to go back to the plant just to bypass a valve or something that can wait, or is it truly an emergency and you do have to go in because Murphy's Law says that this is going to happen. when it's bad weather out, or you're on vacation, or something is most inconvenient. So you can make those decisions um, as necessary. And also, operators that might be in the same plant but might not necessarily be in front of the machine or in the right production area. It helps keep them more efficient so they can see what's going on by remotely. But remotely could mean just a few feet away, or several hundred feet away, just not standing in front of the machine at the time. So what I'm going to do here is give you an example. Now this is an example built into InduSoft Web Studio, our PC demo, which I've talked about a few different times. I'm just going to run that demo. And in this demo, you can see here I'm running the demo. This is the runtime. And down here, what I'm going to do is click on either my computer name or the IP address. And when I click on that, it's going to prompt me for security. Now, if I have security, which you should do, especially on an application that's going to be exposed to the real-world internet or even in a plant environment, you should set up security. Now for this one, we just have guest and no password, but you could and probably should have user names and real passwords. I'm just going to click on OK. And what this is doing is now it's getting and installing that issymbol.ocx. And once that's installed, notice that this is pointing at the IP address of my computer and the startup.html. That's the screen name. And now it's running this application in my browser. And there's another feature here which will show where it is. I can actually scale this, and notice the screens are scaling as well. Now what I'm going to do here just quickly is go to the food and beverage industry screen. Now the first time you go through this, it's got to cache some of the pages, so it's going to take a couple of seconds. But remotely, a couple of seconds here or there is much better than minutes or hours of driving time. I'm going to go here on the food and beverage screen, and notice the switch here. Now what I'm going to do is go, a couple of other things to note is that notice that this stayed on the same screen. So the WebThinClient and the server do not have to be on the same screen. They can be, and you can set that up to interact that way, but in this case it's separate screens. So you could have somebody from the maintenance department on maintenance screen, somebody from the quality department on quality screens, and the operator seeing their standard operation screens. The WebThinClients can also be in their own languages as well, different from the other WebThinClients as well as the server or the runtime as well. So let's put this screen. Now when I click on this, I'm going to lose the focus of the browser window, but I'll get that back in a moment. So I'm going to click on Industries and go to that same screen here. And you can see that I can click on auto versus manual here. I'm going to bring the browser back, and what I can do is click on the same switch here in the browser, and through that port 1234, we're synchronizing up that tag back to the auto versus manual. And so when I click on that, what it's doing, let me go back to the PowerPoint presentation here. When I click on that in the browser, it writes to the tags database. The tags database gets synchronized up with the server database, and then you see that on the real runtime as well. That tags database, since that is set as server scope, would then also communicate out to any other WebThinClients that are on the network, and then set up that tag there as well. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to take a look at here is how we set this up in our project that we've been working with. Let me close down. Oh, another thing to bring up is the web server that we're using in this PC demo application is an included what we call NT web server. And the normal operation and the demo project actually launches this automatically. You'll see here that it's listening. If for some reason you get not listening here, then something is conflicting on port 80, and it's quite often another web server, or sometimes I've even seen some email programs go against that. So, and then you'll see not listening here. So if you see that, that's one of the reasons why this wouldn't be working. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. I'm going to close my browser, go back into my development environment here. Let's exit the demo application, back into the development. And now let's go back into our project that we've been working with. This is the one where we've had all the screens that we've been working with up to this point. Now, one of the first things that we're going to do is set up the server here. So we'll go over here to the Project tab, web, and by server I meant data server. So this is the connection to the tags database. Now I can put in an IP address in here, and that will tell ISYmbol where the IP address of the computer, where to go get the tags from. If I leave this blank, it will take the IP address out of the address bar in the browser and use that during runtime. So for the most part, I don't even have to configure this. I don't have to put an IP address in here. By default, the send period is 100 milliseconds. Prior to, I believe in 7.0, we changed this. It was 1 full second or 1,000 milliseconds. Now we've changed this down to 100 milliseconds. There's some checkboxes here for configuration. We can disable remote client commands. That would essentially set up the thin clients as read-only, so that they couldn't issue commands from the thin clients. But in this case, we want that interaction to take place, so we're going to leave that unchecked. We could enable tooltips on the thin clients. We can enable auto screen scaling when I first open that browser up, and then I change the size of that. That automatically scales the screens. With this unchecked, the graphics and the screens will stay full size no matter the size of the window of the browser itself. And for some projects, it may be worthwhile to enable file compression. And then most computers now can handle the file compression on the fly, so that it's actually faster to do compression and then send less information across the wire or wireless, and then decompress on the other side. So that's a choice that you get to make. We can set up logging. So if we enable logging on the thin clients, this is used for troubleshooting on the thin clients. It's whatever you set up here in the output window. Right click on settings and configure here. We can log tags, we can do trace messages, things of that nature, and log on the thin client themselves. And so you can put in a file name and path there where you want that to log. Also, virtual keyboard, pop-up keypad, or keyboards on the thin client. You can configure that independently of the virtual keyboard that you can configure here under the viewer. Now, this is the viewer for the keyboard for the runtime, the real runtime, the server, where here in this is the keypad on the thin client. So you can configure those differently than you can on the real runtime. Something different, a little bit different in version 7.1. We used to have a scale factor for the keypad or for the keyboard. We've now moved that out because now this built-in dialog box not only adjusts the scale of the virtual keyboard in version 7.1, but it also adjusts the dialog box for the security as well as the e-signature for the login as well. So that's now been moved out of that, and that's just a little bit different than previous versions from 7.0 and lower. Also here under Advanced, we can configure a secondary data server IP address, and will automatically fail over if it loses communications. We can get the timeout for switching stations down here, and then the backup URL where to point that to. Here is something important to pay attention to. Here's the website where the ISYmbol gets installed from. And if your PC, your thin client, does not have access to the real-world internet, it's not going to be able to get to this. It's not going to install ISYmbol, and it's going to fail. So you have a couple of different options. You can actually point this to an internal, an intranet URL and put ISYmbol on an internal server. You also have the ability to install the cab file directly. That's in the bin file, bin folder of where Indusoft was installed. Or we also have an installer called Thin Client Setup, also in the bin folder, the bin folder of Indusoft Web Studio. So you have a few different ways that you can install that, and there's probably even more. What I probably haven't mentioned until this point, if I have, it's worth repeating, is that we've got a full webinar video on our website that shows much more details than I'm going to cover in this video. So lots of different variations on security and how to configure a lot of this thing. So it bears watching that webinar if you want more details on configuring WebThin clients. Here, the web tunneling gateway, as I mentioned, let's go back to the topology here. If for some reason that you can't get across port 1234, or it's more beneficial to go all over port 80, instead of doing this, you can use the web tunneling gateway to go from the tags through the web server and out across port 80. So in order to configure that, we can enable this, and that then needs Microsoft IIS to be able to do that. You can't do that with Apache or other web servers for that matter. We can also configure secure socket for communications for this, and in that case we need to then start talking about security certificates, and that is all covered in that webinar, and a little bit beyond the scope of what we're going to do here, but that's where you normally would get the HTTPS and the little lock symbol, and you'll see that when you're doing banking websites and other secure credit card orders and things of that nature, and that's usually something that's handled on a more secure basis, so we can do that as well. Also, we can have secondary IP address of where that would be, so that's some of the advanced configurations. Something else related to security, here under IP security, you can enable this and put a range of IP addresses or even a single address, and only allow IP addresses that are those or within those ranges to access this. So it's another layer of security that says, oh, my tablet or my cell phone or whatever I'm going to use that's Internet Explorer based to be able to connect to this thin client, it has to be within these IP ranges, otherwise we're going to ignore it. So let's see. At this point, I'm going to turn on auto screen scaling. I'm going to leave everything else unconfigured, and I'm not going to put in an IP address because I want to get that right from the address bar. And we'll just say OK here. And then what we'll do is we've got to save our screens as HTML. Before I do that, it's usually a good idea to run the verify. Now, the verify searches the project for errors, optimizes the runtime, removes blank lines, things of that nature. So what I'm going to do is just run this, and I'm going to remove temporary project files, remove blank lines, and just go ahead and do a verify. Now, in order to do a verify, you have to have all your screens closed, your project has to be stopped, and basically it runs through everything and makes sure there's no problems in there. Okay, so that was completed successfully, and I'm going to go close that. And now we're going to go in here and publish, and we're going to save all as HTML. So that's going to take all of our screens as well as our screen groups. Notice we have that screen group, that startup screen group, as header, main, and navigation. That opens up our 3 different screens that we created. But notice here that that's startup.sg or screen group. When we do the publish, it's not only going to publish our screens, but it's going to publish that screen group as well as its own HTML file, which is the one that we're going to call from the browser. So if we do this, we go to publish, save all as HTML. It's going to open up our screens and run through and convert them to HTML. And it gives us a little notice here that we need to have the functionality of the TCP/IP server module needs to be enabled. We're going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll get a warning that says just if you want increased security, you can go ahead and configure that, and which we'll pay attention to if we're going to do a real world application published on the real internet, where security is certainly an issue. So we've got that published. So now if I go back to my project folder here under the web, now we can see all those screens were created as HTML, including our startup screen group was created as or published as an HTML as well. Now anytime that you add new screens or make any changes, you're going to need to publish those screens, and it's probably a good idea to go ahead and do a verify and to publish as well, just to make sure that everything is as cleaned up as it possibly can be. But anytime you add a screen or reconfigure anything, you're going to need to do a new publish. So we've got that done. So now we've essentially what we have now is we have our project. We don't have it running. It's important to have that running, but now we have our screens as HTML. Now we're going to go ahead and configure our web server. Now for testing, let me pull the project or the file explorer back in here. For testing, the easiest thing that we can do is we can go here on the C drive we can go to our program files where Indusoft Web Studio is installed, and in the bin folder here there is a file called ntwebserver.exe. Now this is our test web server, and it needs no configuration. Now it's not very robust, and security may be an issue. We want to promote not using this in a production environment, but for a test there's nothing easier. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to go ahead and right click here, copy. Now I'm going to go back into my training project here, and in the web subfolder I'm going to go ahead and paste that NT web server. Now what it's going to do, that is essentially now this web server, and again it needs no configuration since it's already in the folder with those HTML files. Any requests that it gets, it's just going to publish those HTML files that are in that same folder. So I don't have to do any setup on that at all. So I can just double click on NT web server. We can see that it's listening, and I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. I'm going to then open up my project, and again it's important to have it running. If it's not running, you're not going to get any data, and you won't see screens. But I'm going to go ahead and click run here, and now my project is running. I can then open up my default web browser. Now on my PC, my default web browser is Internet Explorer. I can then go point it at my IP address that I can use here, or I can use the local loopback IP address, which is going to be 127.0.0.1, and then slash that startup, STARTUP .html, since that is in that same folder as where that web server is running, and then I can hit enter. And what this will do is download and install that OCX and show me my screens. This will take just a second here. And the first time, this is again a little bit slower on the first time, but there we have it. I can go to another screen, and let's go to animations here and change my slider here. Go to animations here, get back to my browser. You can see that when I slide that slider, I can change things on the real server. So that's as simple as it can be. Now let's take another step and go, instead of doing my local loopback here, let's try this with my real IP address, which is 192.168.1.105/startup.html. And this is a different connection. Instead of using that local loopback, it's using the real IP address. So now I could use this from a remote PC and point to this as well. So you can see how that interacts, and because I checked that checkbox in the setup, I can scale this, and that screen will scale the graphics as well. So let's now go and do the web server setup for Microsoft IIS and talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to exit out of my runtime, and I'm going to close this NT web server so that does not conflict. And we're going to go into the help system and configure that and see how that is set up. Okay, so something else that bears mention before we get started is that a lot of PCs, starting on Windows XP, are going to have Microsoft IIS already on them, but maybe not installed. So depending on your installation and how your company has deployed Windows, you may have to go into Control Panel and under Programs and Features and turn on Windows features on or off, or install it directly, and then choose Microsoft IIS. For those of you who don't know, Microsoft IIS is Microsoft Internet Information Services, which is the web server. So you may have to do that, and that's dependent upon your operating system and how you'll go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is, I've already done that, and I'm going to go here in just launch that. Now you may have to go to your control panel. I believe in XP that it's actually under Control Panel under Administrative Tools to run Microsoft IIS. I'm running Windows 7 64-bit, so if you're running anything close to that, that's what you'll see here. And another way to do that is here on the Start button. If I didn't already have that here, I could just type in IIS, and it would come up here, and I can go ahead and launch that. Now this is the configuration tool for Microsoft IIS, or the manager for that. Now, a couple things to note in the different versions look a little bit different. In XP, you're going to have some of this start, stop across the top, but it'll be standard kind of icons where stop will be a square and start or play will be a little triangle and restart. Before we get started, after XP, we actually have to configure what's called MIME types. Now that associates file extensions with the particular applications. In this case, like our screens and some of the files within Indusoft Web Studio, we have to associate those with Indusoft Web Studio so it'll make the proper connections there. Also notice here that we can do things at the PC level or down at the individual website level, because we could actually host multiple sites out of this. We're going to configure the MIME types at this top level. Now, let's talk a little bit about MIME types using the help system in Indusoft Web Studio. When we go to help here, and a couple of different ways to do this, but I'm pretty sure that we can get into this by typing IIS, building a simple WebThinClient program here. And here's talking about using a local loopback, which we've already done. And we'll scroll down a little bit more. Also I mentioned that if your NT web server, that test web server that I showed a minute ago, conflicts on port 80, let's say you have Microsoft IIS running at the same time, and it would say not listening, or you have something else, you can actually use this netstat -a-o, that's the letter O, not the number 0. You can use that from a command prompt and see what else is consuming or working on port 80. So that's a nice troubleshooting tip to use. So scrolling down here a bit more, now this is talking about the version of IIS that's in Windows XP, but it's pretty much the same thing. We need to go point the web server to the path where the HTML files are at. Now we did not have to do that when we used that test web server because we put the web server right in that same folder itself. So we'll go do that in a minute. The other thing that we need to do is go configure MIME types. So one of the first ones is the .scc file, and we need to associate that with application/studio. I know that I'm going to need this. You can type this in, or I'm just going to highlight it and copy that and hit Control-C on my keyboard. And so the first one is .scc, and then down here you're going to see a list of the different MIME types that we need to go in and configure. So that first one again was .scc, and I'm going to move this help off of the screen here, go back to Microsoft IIS, and configure MIME types. Now, the different versions do this a little bit different, but what we're going to do is, again, here at this upper level, we're going to go here and add oops, if I can hit the keys, .scc, and here under MIME type, we're going to paste that back in, application/studio, and go ahead and click on OK. Now for me, since I already have this done, it's going to say that it already exists, but for you, we'll go ahead and take that. And what I would like to have you do is, in addition to .scc, also include .scr. And notice here I can just change that type, click on OK, and that already exists for me. But what I'd like to do, and I'm not going to take the time in this video, is to have you go through all of these different MIME types. Now, quite a few of these, probably around half of them or maybe a third of them, are already going to exist, like I just showed, already exist in my system. They may be associated with something else, like .txt is probably associated with Notepad or something like that. .csv might be associated with Excel. Go ahead and just click on OK. It's okay if it's associated with something else, but the real important ones are the .scc, the .sg, and those probably won't be associated with anything else already. So just go ahead and add all of those, and when you get done, come on back, and we'll be waiting for you. Alright, so now that you've done that, we can go here and dive down into this tree view and go into our default website. And here in the default website, which you will probably see if you haven't run IIS before, is this gives us a choice to start the server since it's not already started. If it was already started, you would see stop and restart would be highlighted. So I know that my web server is not running at this point for that particular site. What we have to do now is we have to tell Microsoft IIS where to go find those HTML files. So we're going to go here under Basic Settings, and I'm going to point this to my project. Now this is, let's see, so we're going to go back to my computer and go into the C drive, which is where we saved that. So we're going to go to here, C, and you would do this wherever you save that particular training project that we're working on. Originally I put it under C, IWS 7.1, IWS training, and we have a choice here. We can point this to the web subfolder, which would make it easier because then we would not have to point it to the web subfolder if we maybe pointed it to somewhere else. If we point it to the web subfolder, then that's all I have to do is give it the IP address and then the name of the HTML file. But this will make it, I probably would want to point it to the root folder, and then I would have to give it the IP address /web/HTML. And because the server itself is only going to be publishing in the folder that it's pointing to and below. If I point this to the web subfolder, then Secure Viewer, when I get to that training video, Secure Viewer would not work. So I'd have to put it to where my application is in the root folder, and then if I wanted to use this WebThinClient, then I would need to add the web folder into the path in the address bar of the browser. So there's some reasons why you'd want to do that and not do that. For this case, I'm going to just choose web and say OK. And now I can test my settings. Now this is going to test to see if my security is set up properly, and I have authentication to get into that folder, in which I do. And if this doesn't work, your project is probably not going to work with your WebThinClient. You're going to have to go through and test your security and find out why. It might be a firewall setting that you have to supply some exceptions with. And again, a good thing to check out is our webinar video that we have on our website. Give you some ideas on how to do that as well. So once we have this pointing to our web subfolder of our project, this has to be the project that we're running. Otherwise, it'll point to a database of a different project, which is probably something you don't want to do. I can say OK. And at this point, I can start Microsoft IIS. Well, it says we need the World Wide Web Publishing Service. That's a service that we need to go ahead and start. So I'm going to click on OK. And how we find that is we go here under Control Panel. We go under Administrative Tools. Here under Services. And the World Wide Web Service, because it starts with W, is going to be down almost to the bottom of the list. And here's that www, that World Wide Web Publishing Service, and it is not started right now. We're going to go ahead and kick that off and start that. And I can now close that Services and Control Panel, and now I can start my website, and that is now running. I'm just going to minimize this, and just to go back to our topology diagram here for a moment. What we've just done is configured the web server. We already have the screens published as HTML from before. Now we're going to go up and use Internet Explorer and see how that works. So we have to make sure that our project is running. If it's not running, you're not going to have the tags database to go ahead and request from. And now I can launch. Conveniently, I have this web browser button. That's why we put it in the header in the first place. And now I can go ahead and here, and just so I can see my IP address here, I can do 192.168.1.105. Your IP address will probably be different. More than likely will be different. If you're running this in the same computer, you can use the 127.0.0.1 as a test. Then we're going to do /startup.html. And when I do that, it should be now pointing to that browser across, the web server to Microsoft IIS across port 80, and you can see that came up much quicker than it did with the NT web server. Also, I've used this in training classes where I've had NT web server, that test web server running, and only a couple of people could simultaneously tie into it. You need something like Microsoft IIS or Apache to be able to effectively handle 5, 10, 20, up to 128 connections. So here you can see, let's go back here onto the animation screen.
I'll go into my browser and go into the animation screen, and you should see now we're using that connection through Microsoft IIS. So let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to cover? Let me take a brief look at my notes here. Yes, there is. When we configured here under the project settings for the data server here under web, most of these settings are also available in a function called set web config. We take a look at this and we go here under help and we do set web config. You will see that the set web config has the same or most of the same settings that we can do under the settings here. Let's go back to that screen. Here under project web, these same settings. So you can change this on the fly via your runtime via that script command. We do have, I mentioned, built-in security. We can do that. Let's see, MIME types, we talked about that. Webs, okay, we got that. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes off screen. Again, it's important to run the application. We talked a little bit about auto screen scaling. Oh, let's go back into the datasheet view here real quick, and I can show you where the scope is for those tags. So here under datasheet view, by default, all my scope of my tags is such that I have them set up as server. I could have any of these tags set up as local, and then they would not get synchronized between the thin clients and the server or out to other thin clients as well. So that covers everything that I wanted to for this video. Hopefully you found it informative and it will help you out deploying a great WebThinClient application. Have a great day.